Hey, I know you're probably here for Pathfinder, but I hope you can stick around, at least for a little while, to hear me out on this. I think there's a lot you can gain from breaking down and understanding other systems, even if you never try them out yourself, and I promise this book is worth its weight in words. Anyway, on with the video. Hey, it's me, Lex, back at you with another tabletop role-playing game video. Today I have my initial system thoughts for Shadow of the Weird Wizard. These are my thoughts, just like with the Starfinder 2nd edition book before. I've been able to run any sessions for actual players, but after I've played around a bit in sort of a sandbox as a GM, placing down creatures, making some characters, playing them out against one another. Shadow the Weird Wizard got recommended to me by a colleague of mine. I've been reading it for the past week or two probably, and I've had a lot of good thoughts about this. This is developed by Robert J. Schwalb. He is one of the designers, if I remember correctly, on D&D 5e, but he has since left the company and made plenty of other stuff on his own regardless. And I would say that the pitch, the unofficial pitch that I would probably give this book is that it's D&D 5e if 5e had a tighter eye on its balancing and getting that right, and then also was just more focused on actually having a design goal and carrying that out. And well, I don't think it's a perfect one-to-one translation. I'll get into the specifics as we go along here. So this is the Shadow of the Weird Wizard book. It is the essentially core book. There's also Secrets of the Weird Wizard out, and then other core books are coming as we continue. But the all of the game rules, more or less, are going to be in here. And then Secrets of the Weird Wizard has a few other things, which I'll be bringing up as we go along. I'll link both down below. But I'll go through just in chapter order and give my thoughts on each little bit. So it has an introduction where it gives you a lore primer, basically. And this is interesting enough on its own right, but I don't think it's very relevant to a system because this is somewhat of an agnostic mechanic game. But the idea is still very fun. There's the weird wizard. It's this super mysterious, powerful wizard, often, I believe, the east. And the old country is off in the west, and the... Sorry about the noise in the background, by the way. And the weird wizard recently disappeared, and it's caused a lot of things to go crazy, and people are expanding out into where he used to live, and there's crazy stuff. That's the basic pitch. But when we get into the mechanics, there are some very simple rules. So when you create a character, you pick a few things that actually matter. You'll pick your ancestry, which gives you your size, your speed, and then some special feature or something. So humans get to increase 2 attributes by 1. You know, standard stuff. And then you pick a profession. Shadow of the Weird Wizard, and this is, you're either going to love this or you're going to hate it, has professions and not skills. There is no thievery or performance or etc. Instead, you pick a profession. There's a long list here. They have of examples. You could be a gravedigger, a tanner, a jailer, etc. These start you with some items. So a jailer has a club and a lantern. A constable has a club and a badge of office, etc. But more importantly, whenever you attempt a skill check, if you can tie in how your profession would help you, then your GM will give you an easier time with that. And we'll get into that when we get to the game rules, how exactly that works. Other than that, though, you get a set of basic equipment and then a choice of some different starter packs, or you can just start with 2 gold pieces. The wealth value is kept relatively low. This is a level 1 to 10 game, which is very interesting. And then it has other things like appearance tables, background, identity, personality, etc. All these things are nice flavor, but they don't actually change anything mechanically. And then you choose a novice path, and a novice path is either going to be fighter, mage, priest, or rogue. It's the 4 archetypical classes. This is going to define basically your core of your character for the rest of the game. And there are only 4 stats in Shadow the Weird Wizard. There's strength, agility, intellect, and will. And each of those you get to set an attribute for, and then all of the rolls in the game are either against a set DC of 10 or against the DC of a different creature or object if something is opposing you. So the example that they give in the book is that if you were to pick a lock, the DC would always be 10 because nothing is opposing you directly, magic notwithstanding. Whereas if you try to shove a creature, you would go against their strength score, their strength DC, which is 10 plus their ability score. As for the actual checks, the entire game is played only with a D20 and D6, and you roll a D20, add your attributes, and then add your boons and banes. These are basically how you create specialization or challenge in Shadow the Weird Wizard. Whenever you're making a check, you have X number of boons and X number of banes, usually applied onto you by spells, other effects, monster abilities, your abilities, etc. You will subtract the number of banes from the number of boons, roll whatever is left over, and then keep the highest modifier. So if you have 4 banes and 2 boons, they'll subtract from one another and leave left over 2 banes. You'll roll 2d6, and whichever one is the highest, you'll keep that number and subtract it from your check total. So the highest modifier you can get on either side is a plus or minus 6, and that's if you roll a 6 with your boon or bane. So very interesting with that. And then when we get into path benefits, you choose your novice path at level 1, an expert path at level 3, and then a master path at level 7. And these will give you increasingly specialized and powerful abilities. As you can see here, there are only 4 novice paths, but if I expand out the expert paths sidebar here, there are quite a few of them. Everything from Arcanist to Warden. And then there are even more when you get into the master paths, and this is how you have your character progression. Now, Shadow the Weird Wizard has a very interesting, like, expected style of play. Rather than an ongoing campaign where level ups happen, you know, whenever, like with XP totals, Shadow the Weird Wizard has a built-in expectation and system, although it very much seems like the type of thing that if you want to play a standard style adventure, you can. But it has a built-in expected style of play wherein the party will go on 10 quests and get downtime in between each quest, and they'll level up in between each quest, and each quest should last, you know, about a session, maybe longer, like 2 sessions. So it's a very fast game, and that's part of the idea. And so you'll see that when you get down into the abilities here, like for example a fighter, you start out with 16 health, a natural defense score of 10, combat training and combat recovery. This is a very simple character, all things considered. But you would only be playing it for 1 session, and then you move to level 2, and you get to choose from this big old list of unique abilities. And then you'd play with that for one session, move on to the next one, etc. And then in between sessions, they even have rules for downtime and how to use that to widen the scope of what your character is capable of as well. So, for example, you might learn another language, or you might learn another profession to widen your skill set as a character, etc. And it creates this interesting, in my mind, again, I have not tried it out yet, but it creates this interesting and kind of unique dynamic where the expected play style is this back and forth between the two modes of play. And I feel like it would create a very engaging sort of... I mean, when you're playing a video game, specifically first-person shooters, they tend to have, say, an arena that you'll go through, you'll kill all the bad guys, whatever. And then there will be a rest period in between where there will be some story, maybe some parkour, maybe some secret grinding or a puzzle, etc. And this even applies to certain kind of older school dungeon design styles where you'll have a combat and then a puzzle, combat and then a trap, etc. And the idea is like switching back and forth, and I think that works out really well here, at least in theory. Now, your choice of novice path is going to determine kind of what your character is going to be best at over their career, but it won't lock you in at all. There are no prerequisites for expert paths or master paths at any point, which means, and this is part of the intended design, that as you go along, you can adapt to what your party needs or what you find interesting or what's happening in the story. That's actually the expected style, is that when you get to 3rd level and you choose an expert path, you're choosing it based on the story of either your character or the campaign that you're playing. You can, of course, still choose just based on mechanics or what you find interesting, or maybe a direction you want your story to go. But it has this very much focus on collaborative building of the story between you and the game master, or they call it the sage here, but I probably won't use that terminology in this little system overview. But for example, seeing the fighter here, you have 16 health, defense of 10. All of your attack rolls are with 1 boon. And when you crit with an attack, you can roll the damage an additional time and use the highest total. That's pretty strong. And then combat recovery gives you some healing mid-combat. Whereas mage, here you start out with 12 health and only 8 natural defense, but you get some spells, and then at level 2 you get spell recovery, where as an action you can heal half your damage and regain all expended castings of your novice spells. This lets you stretch your spell list a lot further, and it's real big for a mage to be able to do. And then there's priest and rogue. I won't get too much into the specifics of these classes, because that's not really what the review is about. It's more about the overall concepts of the game. When we get into the game roles here, the different types of roles, as I mentioned before, there are roles for each of the 4 attributes, and then there are also luck rolls, which is just always you roll a straight d20 and the target is always 10. And they have this very interesting thing called luck ends, where if an effect is on you, say like fire, where it could go out, it might say, you're on fire, here are the effects, luck ends. And that just means at the end of the round, you will roll a flat d20. If you match or beat 10, then you will stop burning. They have general rules in here like size and reach, defense, but what I want to look into real quick here, and something else that I really like this system for, I thought it was a little strange at first, but once I got into it, is that they track health and damage and dying differently here. Your health is a value as normal. It shows how much damage you can take. Damage, rather than taking away from hit points, is just damage on you. It counts up, and when it matches your health score, then you become incapacitated. After you're incapacitated, when you take more damage, you start losing health equal to the damage you would take. And so that lowers your maximum health temporarily if you take damage while you're downed, basically. And then it has its own rules for, you make a luck roll when you're downed. On a success, you heal 1 damage, which brings you back to consciousness. On a failure, you remain incapacitated. And you always lose 1d6 health at the end of a round if you remain downed as well. But it creates this really interesting kind of back and forth. You die when your health is 0, by the way. It creates this interesting kind of back and forth where damage being a count-upable modifier means that you can kind of play with it. And health being more stationary means that you can take health damage from certain effects and have this kind of lasting injury over the course of the day, even if your party has access to a bunch of healing potions and healing abilities, etc. If your health is down, you're going to need to just rest. And when we get down to death, something else, it's just a little thing I found very interesting, is that if you die, every day you lose a d6 of health, or, well, your body loses a d6 of health as you are rotting away. And health loss that way, even if you are revived, is a permanent reduction because of the ravages of decay and so on. It's very interesting. And I will say, for me, I am an enjoyer of much more difficult systems, so things like on a success on your recovery check, you heal and become conscious again, or things like resting, uninterrupted rest for 6 hours heals all damage and regains 1/10 of your health score. Stuff like this is a little too fast-paced for me, a little too forgiving. But it seems easily adjustable, and I would definitely, and I'm going to, when I try out the system, give it a shot anyway. I just think that it's probably here to elicit a type of mood and convey a type of game that I'm not too into, but I know a lot of people are, where the party is a little bit more survivable. Things are very much in their favor, etc. They also have one of my favorite things, which is they have traits and conditions that are very decently well defined. If you're confused, you cannot use reactions, and you make intellect and will rolls with 1 bane. When you're cursed, you make luck rolls with 1 bane. When you are poisoned, you make attribute rolls with 1 bane and grant a boon on rolls against you. In addition, at the end of each round, you lose a d6 of health. Conditions are very well codified here, and something that they specify is that conditions can stack as long as they're not from the same source. So if I believe it would work where if one person were to I don't know, you couldn't stack 2 of the same poison on a blade to double poison someone. But if you hit someone with a poison blade and they become poisoned, and then you hit them with a poison blade again, they can become poisoned a second time, I believe. They even have some subsections for not exactly effects, but like situations you could find yourself in and how they'd be represented. So, for example, here, being buried. If you're covered in debris, it makes it so that, like, you can't target things. There's obstacles. Has rules for actions, digging through soft material, etc. Deprivation of food and water, sleep deprivation, various poisons, infection, suffocation, transformation. This is very interesting. and I'll get into it a little bit later, but their rules for stuff like wild shaping, for example, transforming, is that you use the strength and agility scores of the new form, the defense and health scores of the new form, ignoring any losses to health from your previous form, but carrying over your damage total. Your possessions either drop to the ground in your space or stay on you, and the sage might rule that certain items fall off you when you shapeshift. You lose the ability to speak if the creature can't speak. You lose all the traits of your original form, gain new traits, but you retain all your talents, which are like your various effects you are able to take advantage of. It's very interesting. It measures distance. It has various rules for that. Things for basic knowledge, professional knowledge, and then it has in-depth rules for senses like sound and hearing, light and vision, obscurement, wind, special senses, which are keyworded, so things with awareness always perceive anything around them within the listed number in yards, and it uses yards and squares interchangeably, etc. Even has rules for communication and for companions, which is all the way down here, and how those function, and then it gets into combat. And this is probably the last bit that I'll get into the minutia of. Combat is very interesting in this system. I actually was a little surprised to see how interesting it was. So, unlike in D&D 5e, where you just have like some movement you can walk with, and then an action and a bonus action, or in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where you have the 3-action system and everything uses that. In Shadow the Weird Wizard, you have an action, you have your movement, and you have your reaction. Movement is a value you spend on various actions. So it's kind of like the 3-action economy in Pathfinder, but just for movement. So for example, a human has a move speed of 5. So they have 5 yards to spend on these various actions. So for example, climbing. For every 2 yards of movement you expend, you can climb up, down, or across a distance of 1 yard. If you use a rope, you can descend 2 yards for every yard of movement you expend. And then you grant a boon on rolls against your defense and agility while you're climbing. So if my character were adjacent to a wall with a rope, I could spend 4 of my 5 yards of movement to climb up 2 yards. I can expend 1 yard to drop prone on the surface I'm standing. I can spend 2 yards to crawl a yard. Flying lets me move 2 yards for every yard of movement I expend, and lets me fly with that. There's jumping, leaping, mounting and dismounting, retreating, sneaking, standing up, swimming, teleporting. And retreating is specifically because this is one of those systems where every creature has opportunity attacks. If they have their reaction and you move normally within their reach, they can hit you. But the retreat movement, you expend an additional yard of movement for each yard you would move, preventing the enemy from making a free attack against you. The only thing is that retreating does not work if the tile you're moving into would be within reach of another enemy. So if you, I'll pull out my little thing here. If you are in a grid like so, there we go. Sorry, I just gotta subdivide this for my example. Alright. If you're in a grid like so, right here in the middle, and there are 2 other dudes here and here, then you're fine. If you walk into here, you can retreat back to here. But if you are caught in the middle of these 2, so you're right there, retreating here would still be within reach of this guy and this guy, so you could not retreat if you were flanked like this. And so it creates this kind of emergent sort of Even though there are no specific benefits to flanking a creature like in Pathfinder, it has this emergent benefit where they can't get away from you anymore. And I find that very interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to enjoy it personally. I prefer when the game is a little looser, but I think it's definitely worth giving it a shot, trying it out. I think it's very interesting how it does this, and I really like how it turns the movement into an action point system by having you spend your movement on these various types of things. I really like especially how retreat is, rather than its own action that you're doing, it's a modifier on another one. So you can retreat as you're flying, but you have to spend an additional yard of movement for every yard you'd move. And that's just very cool to me. And the same thing with the sneaking, etc. There are also rules for mounts, vehicles, etc., but I'm not going to get into that. I'll get into the small bits with equipment. Rather than tracking any sort of direct bulk or weight, it just has your carrying limit is that you can hold a number of items equal to your strength score, or you can carry or wear a number of items equal to your strength score by holding them in your hands or strapping them to your body. And you can exceed that value, but for every 2 items beyond that limit, your agility score is reduced by 1 until you're not overloaded. But then it leaves, and this is something I'm not a huge fan of, is that containers hold everything they count as a single item. So for example, a backpack holds a bunch of stuff and it only counts as 1 item. I think that's fine. But it's just left up to the game master, like how many items can fit in a backpack, for example. You just have to kind of make that up. And then it gets into things like armor. I find the armor rules kind of interesting. When we were looking at the armor classes or natural defenses earlier, when you equip armor, it either sets your defense to a set value or increases your natural defense by an amount, whichever would be higher. So, for example, with the mages, they start out with a natural defense of 8, which means that equipping basically any of these, the set value would be better. But for the fighter, thank you. I don't know why I said thank you. It's not like you guys are trying to remind me here. But a fighter with a natural armor class of 10 would be able to wear some of these, and also not be able to beat the plus value here. Interesting. I never claim to fully understand the system. I've just read through the book a couple times. I think it has some interesting stuff. Probably one of the most interesting things here is the magic system. They have broken down the magic system into traditions, and there's a bunch of them, and they're all very thematically diverse traditions. So there's chronomancy, there's the dark arts, there's evocation, pyromancy, etc. And you can really specialize into one type, or you can spread it out. Like when we were looking up here at the novice paths for the mage, at level 1, you get 2 traditions and 4 novice spells. And then at level 2, you get another tradition and 2 more novice spells. And so when we come down here to the magic system, I'll just be using aeromancy as an example because it's right at the top here. When you unlock a tradition, by spending your tradition, basically your unlock, on it, you get a talent out of the list below. So you could get Jolt or Soaring Leap, Wind Hammer, Words on the Wind. These aren't cantrips. Some of them are unlimited use, but some of them are not. But they are meant to be continually usable minor effects. And then once you've unlocked a tradition, you can start unlocking spells from it. So spending the 1 tradition on aeromancy would allow us to take Forked Lightning, Still the Air, Wind Walk, Wind Wall, etc. But you can also spend additional traditions to unlock the talents. So my 2nd level mage could have put all 3 traditions into aeromancy and gotten Jolt, Soaring Leap, and Windhammer. I wouldn't be able to take spells from any other traditions, but I would be pretty good at aeromancy. And then once you've spent enough that you have all of the talents in a tradition, if you continue to spend your traditions on it, you start getting novice spells. And the way spells work are, rather than learning a spell and like preparing it into a book, just whenever you unlock a spell, you gain a certain number of castings, and you can unlock a spell as many times as possible. So a novice wizard, a novice mage has the 4 novice spells. They could just grab Forked Lightning 4 times and be able to cast it 4 times per rest. Or they could grab Wind Blast 4 times, be able to cast it 12 times because it has 3 castings. Or you could spread it out among all of these, etc. I think it's really interesting how they did this here. I think it would lead to a lot of like thematic focusing on what you want to do. Because that is one thing that I've seen a lot of people struggle with in things like Pathfinder, is that having access to so many spells means that you're kind of pushed to take all of the best ones. Whereas I think this provides a really good basis for focusing on spells because you find them interesting. Like, for example, some of these even have unique rules. The one that I like going to is Evocation. Evocation in Shadow the Weird Wizard is all about words of power. And it has some very complex rules for evocation spells. Novice evocation spells, because they're only a syllable of a word of power, you don't need an action to cast them. You only need to be able to speak. But you can't cast another evocation spell. You can't cast more than 1 per round, no matter what. You're never subject to the effects of an evocation spell you cast, and you must be able to hear, and creatures must be able to hear you to be affected by it. And then you either whisper, speak, or shout the syllable, word, or sentence. And then it affects all creatures within the area indiscriminately. So, for example, there's the harmful syllable. If you whisper it, it's just around you. If you shout it, it's in a bigger area. If you speak it, it's in a bigger area. And if you shout it, it is in a massive area. And as you get louder, it also deals more damage, and it just deals that damage to all creatures in the area. And that applies to everything. And so it creates this very interesting sort of theme in my head where, like, the party wear earplugs so that you can be shouting off these powerful spells like Killing Utterance, or Recitation of Creation's Undoing. All these really fun spells. And they scale with your level as well, the amount of castings you get. So you can speak a lot of power words as you level up. Last but not least, I want to get into the actions in combat. I skipped over this a little earlier because I wanted to get onto all of the different options that could be used in combat, but now I want to point out specifically how engaging the combat, I believe, can still be. There are a variety of actions. There's attack, cast a spell, but then there are other actions like defending that makes it so that you're harder to hit. Things like trying to help creatures or hinder creatures, overcome harmful conditions, all these as actions. Run just triples your speed score until the end of your turn, which again, like I said, because the movement uses an action point system, means that you can use the run action to be like vaulting over low walls, jumping pits, etc. I think it does a really good job at that. Steal, stabilize, throw, etc. But when we get into reactions here, you can even catch objects that are thrown at you. You can use a reaction to cover your ally so you can take damage for them. There's a dodge reaction to protect yourself as a reaction. The free attack, which is attack of opportunity. Withstand, to attempt to resist strength effects, so like being shoved. And then the take the initiative reaction, and I talked about this a little bit in my adaptation of Shadow of the Weird Wizard's initiative system. That video went live yesterday. But Shadow of the Weird Wizard utilizes an initiative style where it goes in phases. There's the initiative phase, and then the enemy phase, and then the party phase, and then it just loops back on itself. And if you use a reaction to take the initiative, you get to go during the initiative phase. Although you can't do that if you're wearing heavy armor, or depending on some other effects. It's very fun. It allows for this kind of dynamic play with initiative, where because monsters are assumed to go first, they have a lot more like agency in that they're this solid threat, but it also gives the players more agency because they can expend a resource to go first as well. And I think that because there are all these universal reactions like dodging, withstanding, even free attack, covering your ally, catching objects, taking the initiative is a very solid cost in this system to go first. As for how they keep attacks interesting, because this was something that I had an eye on. One of my biggest issues with 5e and a lot of games that take a lot of inspiration from it is that attacking doesn't have a lot of options. But Shadow of the Weird Wizard actually does it very interestingly. When you take the attack action, you choose a target, you make the attribute roll, and then you apply the result. But you can apply certain circumstances to your attack. So, for example, you can do a called shot. You aim for a specific part of the body. This imposes 2 banes on your roll, but if you hit, the target becomes impaired in an attribute of your choice until the end of the next turn. And if you aim for an object and get a success, the object takes the damage instead. You can do the same thing. Oh, they do have kind of flanking here. When you make a melee attack against a target in the reach of at least one ally, you roll with 1 boon. Very nice. There's like long-range shooting. If you make a ranged attack within reach of an enemy. These are, called shot is something you can do. Surrounded target is something you can set up. Long-range shooting is just something that can happen. There's high ground, obscurement, invisible creatures, cover, etc. And then there's a really cool thing called bonus damage. The fighting subclasses get bonus damage in the form of d6s. Once per round, when you get a success on a roll to attack with a weapon or natural weapon, you can roll some or all of your bonus damage along with the weapon's damage. And weapon damage is usually like 1 or 2d6. And the bonus damage counts as extra damage. Or, when you take the attack action, you can reduce the amount of bonus damage you have by 2 dice for each additional attack you wish to make, and you can make multiple of them. The attacks have to have different targets. And then you can divide the bonus damage after making all of your attacks. You just get to decide where you want it to go. And then it gives an example. So if you have 3d6 bonus damage, you can remove 2 of that to make a second attack against a second target. And then after you've rolled your attack rolls and seen if you've hit them, you can spend that extra d6 that you have left over to increase the damage on either. It even goes into rules with you can do unarmed attacks on additional attacks, or if you're wielding 2 weapons, you can attack with the second one. It has rules for disarming, but then it has attack options. Every time you attack something, you can change it out to one of these: a disrupting, driving, feinting, guarded, lunging, or pressing attack. And what this does is it removes your weapon damage from the thing you're doing, but you keep the bonus damage if you're going to apply that. So a disrupting attack. If you get a success on the roll to attack and your roll equals or exceeds the target's will plus 5, the target grants 1 boon on the next roll to attack it before the start of your next turn. And so you're foregoing a little bit of damage to grant a boon to the next attack. You might set up someone's more devastating abilities. There's lunging, where you can wield your weapon as if your reach were a yard greater. Very interesting stuff. And then also, you can do the same thing with unarmed attacks. They have various types of actions that you can substitute in as part of their attacks whenever you make them, although unarmed attacks do not benefit from bonus damage. You can shove, trip, grab, and then grab has a few subset actions of dragging, wrestling, and escaping. And then there's the different rules for casting spells. But I think that this creates a very interesting kind of every turn cycle. You get to play around a lot with your bonus damage, which is also action points. And you have a lot of varied options for what you can do when you're attacking. Like you might want to, maybe with your lead attack, you do a disrupting attack. You're foregoing your damage to try and get a boon on your next attack roll. And then your next attack roll is a called shot, so that you can impair them in a certain way. Or maybe you have a hand free and you're going to go in for a grab on them so that they can't run away, and then eventually you wrestle them and try to pin the target, etc. There are a lot of options that a melee character can take, and I think that that's really important, even outside of the classes themselves, because magic is so innately diverse. And then the last thing that I want to cover before I wrap this up here is I just want to show off some of my favorite paths from the list here, because I think that they did a really good job of making very interesting character progression options. I want to go over the Theurge. As a Theurge, you learn the secret names of angels and call them forth to serve your needs, but that makes the gods really angry because they don't like it when you subvert their servants. You walk a path between light and dark because no matter what good you do, the fact that you're stealing from the gods makes you, their enemy. But because your magic is also so strong, it means that evil people also want to take advantage of what you got. And it has this whole spread. Some very excellent art. I think that my favorite piece of art, and I won't go over the class here, but the Elementalist. Very, very excellent, beautiful art here. Although one of my favorite, other favorite paths here is the Druid. They take more from the idea of the Druid as like this secret council, rather than in 5e where it's just like nature people. And so it's this interesting stuff like the Sleep of Ages in between quests. While everyone else is taking downtime, you can enter a Sleep of Ages. So you do nothing but sleep, you're immune to hunger and thirst, you grow no older, you suffer no ill effects from exposure or infection, and you experience vivid dreams, which gives you a bonus. You get a d20 plus your intellect modifier, and that's an insight supply that you can add to attribute or luck rolls during your next quest to alter the effects, potentially. Very interesting. And then finally the Sorcerer, where you conjure up evil spirits from the netherworld and learn the secrets of magic. It's very interesting. You can do this ritual that summons a demon up, and then you roll 3d6, and there's the potential to, if you roll high enough, you can gain the, if you roll 3 6s, You can gain the ability to cast a master spell of your choice from any tradition that you can then cast until the next time you rest. And that would be at level 3. Normally you can't cast master spells until level 7. There's a lot of fun stuff in here. I would recommend taking a look at the book if it's something that interests you. But anyways, as a summary of everything I've gone over here, Shadow the Weird Wizard is, I think, a very interesting system. It's definitely more rules light than Pathfinder is. I would even say more rules light than 5th edition is, but it's very well defined in, I think, what it's trying to do. It makes it very clear how to run it, how to play it. I really like the advice it gives on having this sort of specific setup for the expected play style of the system, but the fact that it has enough malleability to be played in other ways as well. I'm looking forward to trying it out myself, both on the GM side and the player side of the screen. I think it has a lot of potential for a lot of fun. And it even has its sister game, Shadow of the Demon Lord, which isn't compatible per se, but it has some other ideas in it that I would recommend giving a look at. Maybe I'll go over it some other time, but Shadow the Weird Wizard was what interested me more. I really like their initiative system. I really like the progression system within the context of its own game design. I like the versatility that it affords martial characters, particularly with the bonus damage and extra attack system. I think that's a really interesting way to do it. The magic traditions being split up, I think, creates a lot of focused theming that can be very fun. And then the paths are just a whole lot of fun because they can express such a wide variety of characters, and being able to adapt your story as you go, as is the authorial intent, I think is a really interesting proposition. I'd recommend giving it a read, giving it a go, if it's something that interests you. More or less, my opinion is that if you look at it and it looks like something you'd be interested in, it probably is. If it's not, it probably won't be. It's very open about what it's trying to do, and I think that that's a really good thing to see. I think it's a well-designed TTRPG. I'm excited to dig a little deeper into it, and yeah, that's going to be all for me today. Leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more, toss me a few bucks on coffee if you want to keep the channel running, and I will see you all next time. See ya. See ya.